and welcome to the She Wins Women, Wealth, Wisdom, and Legacy podcast. I'm your host, Carol Eddy in Denver, Colorado, and I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Mark Hurley. Mark is the CEO and founder of Digital Privacy and Protection and has co-authored multiple studies on addressing cyber threats. He has started 7 companies and earlier in his career was a managing director at Merrill Lynch and a vice president at Goldman Sachs. He has also served as a presidential appointee at a bureau of the United States Treasury. Hurley is a graduate of West Point and the Stanford Graduate School of Business. So normally I interview my guests and ask questions during this podcast. Since there's so much information to cover and Mark is an expert, I asked him if he would give his full presentation directly to our audience. So Mark, let's get started.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. A little background on my company. What we do is provide a turnkey cyber protection service for clients of wealth management firms. That's for families. It's a comprehensive service. We do everything for the client. It was designed by people I went to West Point with who were either cyber warfare or FBI agents doing cyber. It costs $35 a month, covers everything, technology setup, 24/7 support. We're working with many wealth management firms across the United States and Canada. And a big part of what we do is teach classes like this. Now, what am I going to talk about today are 4 things. Number one, who the bad guys are, what they're after, what are they trying to steal from you, how are they trying to target you, where you're at risk, and what are the specific steps that you need to take to protect your wealth, yourself, and your family. Now, first thing, let's talk about who the bad guys are. If you went to downtown Beijing, you would actually see people walking into office buildings wearing suits and ties, carrying briefcases, and their job is to go in and steal money. They belong part of cyber gangs that openly operate in these countries. They're generally headed by people who by day are either intelligence or cyber warfare officers working for the government targeting Western institutions. And at night, they moonlight and have these people who work with them who steal money. And as long as their interests don't conflict with the state, they're allowed to continue to operate. And you'll find these gangs in Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, and now increasingly in Belarus. Additionally, there are thousands of very small but sophisticated cyber gangs. And this group of people, everyone thinks of them as like someone in their mother's basement, using a computer. No, these are very smart criminals. They've created automated programs using artificial intelligence that target people so they can steal from them. So this first group of bad guys, what they're trying to do is they want to steal money. And what they're after, first and foremost, is to try to get into your bank, brokerage, and custodial account, because that's where most of the money is that they can steal. They also love non-bank finance, like Venmo and PayPal, because it tends to have a fraction of the protections that banks, custodians, and brokerages have. But they also are very much into identity theft. They want to get you enough information that they can steal your identity, primarily to steal your credit. But also about 2.5 million times a year, they're stealing health insurance from families, and they also like to try to steal tax returns. Now, the first thing to understand is where you're at risk, and there's a lot of confusion around this. We've seen an enormous amount of attention on identity theft. And part of this is because there's a lot of these new startups out there that provide identity protection services that have lots of money for advertising. And you don't want your identity stolen. But let's be clear, it's a very different risk than people think. If someone steals your credit by federal statute and federal regulation, you don't have to write a check. Now, you don't want to have it happen because it's a real nightmare to get fixed. But let's be clear, you're not financially liable. What most people don't get, however, is with everything else online, they're taking almost all of the risk. For example, your bank account may have federal deposit insurance, but that's only if the bank fails. If you actually read the agreement that you had to assent to open the account, you effectively agreed that if you're even indirectly at fault and someone steals money out of your account, you're not getting the money back. And we had a family, for example, show up on our doorstep, was working with one of the money center banks, and they had lost $360,000. So they went to the bank, and the bank said, read your agreement. This is the same with custodial and brokerage accounts. And in fairness to all these guys, they spend billions of dollars on cybersecurity. But because most people personally have abysmal cybersecurity, it's very easy for the bad guys to get in to steal money, and they just can't take this risk. Additionally, what a lot of people don't realize is whenever you're online, and you're using Amazon or any of these things, there's an agreement that you had to assent to use. And if you actually read the agreement, it's sort of the opposite of like most commercial activity. In other words, you have to indemnify them so they can sue you, but you agree that you can't sue them. It's really like fundamentally, if you're doing business online, you have agreed that you're taking almost all the risk if you're even indirectly at fault. Let's talk about the second group of bad guys. And they make the first group of bad guys look fairly benign. And they're made up of burglars and predators. And as you can see on the slide, there's a gentleman in the middle that you may recognize. He used to do subway ads. He's currently doing 15 years and 8 months in a federally run gated community. Now, what these guys want to target is they want to steal your homes directly and indirectly, and they want to target your kids. The statistics, unfortunately, are very frightening. A recent study found that 4 out of 5 times that a house is burglarized, the burglars are actually using unprotected social media accounts to figure out which houses to hit and when to hit them. And when I say unprotected, what I mean is they don't, unless you've turned on hundreds of privacy settings on your various apps, search engines, and browsers, the bad guys don't have to hack into the account. All the information in the account is effectively in the public domain, and it allows them to track where you're at and figure out when to rob your house and potentially put your family at risk. Title fraud is really widespread. It happens about 12,000 times a year. This is how they indirectly try to steal houses. And the way this works is, let's say you have a vacation home, the season's over, someone will come in, make a filing on the property claiming they bought it at the county assessor's office. But the county assessor, he doesn't have the resources to figure out if this is fraudulent or not. Then what they will do is go out and either borrow money against the house, they'll rent the house out, or they may even try to sell it. Stalking online is just out of control. And this is where the predators come in. The FBI has a separate unit just to deal with online stalking. There's so many instances of this. Now, with that cheery start, let's talk about what you got to do to protect yourself. And anybody can protect themselves through a combination of knowledge, widely available but inexpensive technology, and a bunch of common sense steps. But the first thing you have to keep in mind is there are two aspects to this. Everybody thinks about cybersecurity, but they don't focus on cyber privacy. And you can't have one without the other. Cybersecurity is about keeping people from getting into your accounts and stealing your money. Cyber privacy is about limiting the non-public personal information about yourself that you put online, and far more importantly, control who can access that information. All right, let's start by talking a little about cybersecurity. Now, rule one, if you work in my business, is that you have to assume if you're connected to the internet, you have been breached and you will be breached. Everybody gets breached. The CIA, Department of Defense, the FBI get breached regularly. The issue isn't whether you're breached, it's what happens after you're breached. So the whole key to protecting yourself from a cybersecurity standpoint is setting it up so that just because a bad guy's, it doesn't mean they can steal anything, that they have to be right 4 or 5 times because you put in multiple layers of protection in the way you set this up. And as a consequence, the complexity of stealing from you goes up dramatically. The way to think of this is in terms of complexity, it's almost like a logarithmic function is how complicated it becomes. And if I'm a bad guy, I quickly figure out that it takes a lot more resources than I can likely steal, and I go target somebody else, particularly because most of the country doesn't do anything. Now, let's talk about the ways that you're likely to be breached. And these are the 7 most common, but let's be clear, there are many other ones. And if I do this class a year from now, I'll probably have 3 or 4 more ones that I'll add to this. But these are right now the most common ways people are breached. For starters, about 1 million passwords a week are compromised. And the way this works is that the cyber criminals have very powerful computers and sophisticated algorithms, and they're regularly collecting information from the web. So let's say a company has a data breach. They will grab that data, including the email addresses. They'll throw it into their models. They're regularly scraping unprotected personal information online, and they'll put it into these algorithms, and they'll try to hit thousands of accounts using these email addresses and attempt to correctly guess the passwords. And I know that sounds like it'd be very difficult to get through, but it really is not, particularly with the advent of AI software. And there's a new study that came out at the end of 2023 from a firm called Hive. And what they do is what's called brute force attack simulations. A brute force attack is a fancy way of saying, I'm going to use a computer to correctly guess your password. And in this study, the first time ever, they used ChatGPT. And what they found now is that if you're using an 8-digit password that is alphanumeric, okay, we're talking uppercase, lowercase, numbers and symbols, even if it's randomly generated, it takes the computer now less than 1 second to correctly guess the password. So if anybody on this podcast is using 8-digit passwords, don't bother. You're not slowing anybody down. And if you go further down, you can see in the left-hand column that if, say, you're just using numbers as opposed to alphanumeric, you could use a 15 digit password that's all numbers, and it would take them less than 2 seconds to correctly guess it. The only way to protect your accounts is to use lengthy, randomly generated, unique passwords. You should be using 20 to 25 digit alphanumeric passwords. If you're not, it's not that hard for the bad guys to get to you. The second way that people get breached is they don't realize that when you buy a device from the store, the people who are selling you the device, both the device makers and the software providers, they make a lot of money off of collecting and selling your information. So they set up their settings, the default settings that you get, so that automatically your device exports a lot of information to them. And the way it does that is it tracks every online account that you visit and the user ID and password for it, typically in about 5 different places on the device and software. Well, what's problematic about that is that if I can find a way to get into your device, a very common way this happens is you're at a bar or restaurant, you're not paying attention, someone looks over your shoulder, they see you put the passcode in, they distract you, and they grab the device. If they do that, all of your passwords are sitting there. And we've seen people lose more than $100,000 in less than an hour when this happens. The only way to prevent this is you have to turn on a litany of various complicated privacy and security settings on your devices. There's about 60 of them that you have to turn on an Apple device. There's about 120 on a Windows device that you need to engage. The third most common way people get breached is they have smart home technology. Now, everybody likes to have an Alexa or a doorbell or the coffee pot that turns on automatically. And that's fine. But what's potentially problematic is that if I can breach one piece of equipment attached to the network, I can breach the entire network. In other words, I get in through the coffee pot, I can see what everyone else is doing online. And what cyber criminals will do is they'll target houses that have this type of technology, breach the piece of equipment, and then they'll sit and wait and copy passwords. We have a client of ours who got hit this way before he became a client. And they went through the doorbell and they sat there for 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden, they locked him out of all his devices. They got into his bank and custodial accounts. They got into his work accounts. He couldn't even get into his home network. And what we wound up doing was, fortunately, he got us right away and we were able to stop anything from happening. It's a very rare instance. But it took us like 7 or 8 days to get him up and running again. And the way you protect yourself is every piece of equipment attached to the home network has to be set up in a way so it has a unique, randomly generated 20 to 25 digit alphanumeric password. And you never ever use the home Wi-Fi, use the family name on that because it makes it too easy to target you. You should use some random number. The fourth most common way that people get hit is through computer viruses. It's also called malware, and it's software that gets behind your defenses. Now, everybody has antivirus, but the problem is there's a daily arms race between the people who are making the new viruses and the people making the antivirus. And some days the good guys win, sometimes they lose. Now, increasingly, people have been told never ever click on an email that's been sent to you or a text message if you're not absolutely certain. And some people get that, but understand about 1.5 billion times a day, these things are sent out. And between 200 and 300 million times a day, somebody clicks on the link. And when they do, it infects their devices. But also the cyber criminals have gotten much more aggressive. For example, there now are a thing called Trojans. And a Trojan is an app that looks like a legitimate app, but it actually has malware in it. And what happens is that if you download this onto your device, you're effectively infecting your device. Even worse, if you leave your device alone at a restaurant or a bar or at a resort for like 30 seconds, they can download this onto it. They've even had some of these things show up on the Apple sites and the Google Play sites. The only way to protect yourself is one, never leave your device unattended. Number two, regularly check it to see if you recognize every app that's on there. And number three, only use apps that you absolutely have to have. Otherwise, you're just putting yourself at risk. The fifth most common way people get breached is they effectively give away their passwords by using public Wi-Fi while not encrypting their online traffic. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if I get into a network, I can see what everyone else is doing on that network. And I literally can sit and watch and copy passwords. So what happens is you go to a Starbucks, you go to a hotel, you connect to the Wi-Fi. There are people there that sit around all day watching to see if you put passwords in. In fact, if you go to one of these places, look around, you may see somebody sitting around sipping coffee all day. That's probably what they're doing. Now, the way you protect yourself is you use what's called a virtual private network. And that's a type of software that's not expensive, and I'll explain a little more about it later in the podcast. But it encrypts your online traffic. So the only people who can see what's going on your device is you, and no outsiders can look in. The sixth most common way people get breached is they're foolish enough to ever plug their device into a public charging station or a rental car. And I say you can do that, but you have to do it in a protected way. Now, most of the charging stations are assembled in China. There's a high probability if you plug it in, two bad things are going to happen. Your information is going to go out and a virus is coming in. With a rental car, they automatically download your information. It's just how the systems are set up. And there are a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs at these places who will know how to grab that info and sell it. How you protect yourself is you get a $2 device. It's sold at Walmart, it's sold at Amazon, and it's called a USB blocker. And it's a prophylactic. You take this device, you plug it into the charging station, or you plug it into the rental car, and you take your power cord and put it into this device. And when you have that thing, what happens then is the only thing that happens is electricity comes in and nothing goes out. Now, the seventh most common way people are getting breached is a thing called vishing. And this has become a very aggressive form of an attack being done on individuals. And what they will do is they will pose as either the bank, the custodian, or even a wealth manager. And it's not very difficult for them to spoof or copy somebody's caller ID. So you answer your phone and it looks like the bank is calling you. And they'll say, we think someone is trying to get into your accounts. We need to protect you. And they'll know a lot about you. They'll know a lot about your financial advisor. I mean, they've done a lot of work because it's easy for them to get this data. And they're very aggressive, confident, authoritative sounding people. And what they'll want you to do is to put some sort of number, some sort of code into your app. But if you do that, it's giving them access to everything and they can loot your accounts. How do you protect yourself? Number one, none of these places ever call you when there's this kind of problem. All they do is turn your account off. So you have to understand that if you're getting the call, just assume it's fraudulent. All right, let's talk about cyber privacy. Now, a lot of people ignore this, but this is and quite candidly, the single biggest risk to your family and your wealth if you ignore this. There's been great fortunes built in our company over the last 30 years involving technology. And if you actually understand the business models of these companies, what they're largely doing is collecting your information and selling it. Meta gets about $60 billion a year off of selling people's information. I saw a report that said Amazon makes more money off your information than they do off selling the other products. And the problem, of course, is they set their things up so they can gather all this info and they make it so it's very easy to do that. But also, people you don't want seeing this information, like criminals, can easily also access the information. Now, the companies give you the ability to opt out, but they make it complicated because they make so much money from this. And so what you have to do is navigate a host of privacy and security settings on your devices, your apps, your browsers, your search engines, so that the only people who can see this information are who you approve to see it. But it's a very lengthy, complicated task. For example, Meta, there's about 80 settings you should engage. LinkedIn, which we view as the highest risk one, there's about 115 settings you should engage. But if you don't, you're setting yourself up for a lot of problems. For example, it doesn't take a lot of information to steal your identity. If anybody saw the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio called Catch Me If You Can, where he played a con man by the name of Frank Abagnale, he likes to say, if I know where you're born, and I know your birthday, and I know your name, I'm 98% of the way of stealing your identity. So think about this. Let's say you have a social media account and you put your biography in there. You tell your life story. It's not very hard for someone to go in and grab that info. And what they'll do is they'll use it to steal your credit, but they also will steal your health insurance and use it to steal your tax returns. The equally important on why you want to protect these accounts has been the emergence of a new type of threat called deepfakes. And what this is, cyber criminals are going into unprotected social media accounts and they're downloading videos. And again, they don't have to hack into the account. If you've not turned on the privacy settings, they should just see this information. And they'll take those videos along with AI software and they'll create breathtakingly accurate clones of voices and images. There's even a site for $4.95 will clone your voice and it'll be accurate enough to defeat voice recognition software. There's a site on YouTube where you can create one of these things for a Zoom call. And what do they use this for? Well, one, to pose as you to try to steal your money. But they also, even more frighteningly, they have increasingly doing things like fake kidnappings, where they'll go into a parent or grandparent's accounts, download a video, clone the voice of a child, then they'll call the parent or grandparent, and they'll use the caller ID of the kid, which I said it's not hard to do. And the parent gets this call, and the kid is screaming for help, and someone comes on the phone and says, "You got 45 minutes to wire $10,000 to this location, or I'm going to start hurting your child. Now, the kid is safe, but the parents have no idea about this. And this is why it's so important to protect the information you put online. Equally important, it's very easy to figure out to rob your house if you don't turn on all of these settings. For example, Amazon Photos has a facial recognition capability. There are many apps that have things like this, as well as tagging capability. So if I'm a cyber criminal, I can figure out when you're away from home simply by doing a search query to see if your picture shows up anywhere on the web. So even if the photo isn't in your account, so let's say you're on a trip with friends, someone takes a team photo and puts it into their account, you'll be identified as being in the photo and people can see you're away. A friend of mine's neighbor got robbed this way. Worst of all, very bad people can see a lot of information from parents and grandparents' accounts about kids and grandkids. And this is the scary stuff. And if you talk to the FBI, this is what they really worry about. Look, they can quickly figure out where your kids are, who their friends are, where their schools are. And very bad people use that information to profile the child and then pose as someone of their age in an anonymous chat room. And then they will try to set the child up to trust them. And at some point, start blackmailing the child. And this is a really big problem. Like I said, the FBI is a separate unit dealing with this. All right, that's the bad news. Let's talk about what do you got to do to protect yourself, your wealth, and your family. As I mentioned before, you need a combination of some widely available, inexpensive technology, and then you've got to take a lot of common sense steps. The technology needs, I mentioned a virtual private network. Our company recommends Surfshark. We don't have any bargain with it. We just use it for our clients. And what a VPN does is it automatically encrypts your online traffic and it blocks companies from seeing who you are. The other thing everyone should use is a password manager. It's almost impossible to remember if you use unique, randomly generated 20, 25 digit alphanumeric passwords. It's impossible to remember that for 300 or 400 accounts. But what instead you do is you put them in encrypted software called a password manager. We use Keeper. We think it's very good. It's very easy to use, which is important. And by storing them in there, all you have to remember is one password, and that is the password for the password manager. Now, if you use a password manager, though, we strongly encourage that you write down the password and put it in a safe, because if anything ever happens to you, your family's not going to be able to get in these accounts because you're the only person that's able to access this account. But once you've got it set up, all you have to do is put the password in, it opens up, you click on the account you want. About 80% of the time, it'll auto-populate all the fields. And the other 20% of the time, you just push a button, it copies the password, you paste it in. It dramatically simplifies your operating online once you get it set up. The third thing everybody should have is a private email. Now, this is a pay-for service. It's not like Gmail or AOL or anything like that, because you don't want this email connected to anything else. And you're not using this to replace any existing email. What you're using this for is solely to keep people from changing passwords on your accounts. Now, what I mean by this is I talked about earlier, someone steals your device at a bar or restaurant. One of the things they can do, even if you properly set the device up so it's not recording passwords, they can just go to your email account and then they go to every single place where you might have money and they hit the forgot password link. And then they'll get sent to that email a link that allows them to reset the password. The way you prevent this from happening is you have a separate email, ideally anonymous. You don't put your name on it. And it's solely used for account recovery purposes. So when you set the account up, yes, all the online traffic from that comes to your regular email. But if someone wants to change the password for the email, they have to send it to the private email, which the bad guys don't even know exists, much less have no way to find it and access it. And this prevents this entire line of attack. Now, after you get this, you need to install it on all your devices. Then you've got to get all your accounts, put them in a password manager, and reset the passwords to unique, randomly generated 20 to 25 digit alphanumeric passwords, and do the same for every piece of smart home technology. And again, you store it in the password manager, and then you have to do all the settings I've talked about. There's about 900 settings most people have to turn on to properly protect themselves. 60 on an Apple device, 120 on Windows. And then you got to go for the search engines, the browsers, each of the accounts. Additionally, you should turn on multi-factor authentication on any account involving money. And what multi-factor authentication is that once you've turned that on, even if you have the password, they'll send you a separate code, either to your phone or an email address that you have to put in order to access the account. And that makes it much harder for bad guys who somehow compromise the password to be able to get into the account. Now, if you do all these steps, though, which it's a fair amount of work to do it, but once you've done all these steps, you're what the military would call a hardened target. It's very hard for someone to get to you. In our 3.5 years, we've never had a client get breached and lose money who's done these steps. That said, you also have to set up a second layer of protection for yourself. And the best way to do that is to have an early warning system that alerts you to if someone may have stolen one of your passwords. Now, most of the people who steal passwords lack the offshore operations infrastructure to steal money. So as a consequence, they instead sell them. And there's an aftermarket for this stuff on part of the internet called the dark web. And there are services you can pay for to sign up and use to track this stuff. Now, there are identity protection services that talk about this is their great benefit. But let's be clear, by the time you get to this point, you've already been breached. So you never want to get to this point, but you still want to have an alert that this has happened. We like to describe the identity protection services as somewhat analogous to a pregnancy test. And what we're trying to do is more analogous to birth control. Now, what you'll do is you'll track to see if your bank account or your credit card or something like that pops up. And if it does, then you're ready to take quick action. The other thing that everybody should do is they should go to the county assessor's office wherever they have homes and register for notifications of filings on them. This is how you prevent title fraud. And what happens is if a criminal comes in and makes a filing claiming they bought it, you'll get an email letting you know there's been a filing, and you immediately pick the phone up and you call the county assessor and say, this is bogus. And that's how you stop that from happening. Now, additionally, everyone should at least once a year take a look at the credit reports. These are good indicators that something's going on. But again, as I said before, if someone says your credit, you're not financially liable. You just have a headache getting it fixed. That said, it's critical to check to see if any underage children have these reports, because most identity theft is actually not of adults, it's for kids. And the reason is, in order for the parent to get a tax deduction for a child, the child now has to have a social security number. So it makes them an ideal target for identity theft. And people rarely ever check to see if this is happening. Now, everything I've talked about, if you ever get alerted there's a problem, you got to fix it right away. A lot of my friends, I've said some very smart friends say to me, oh, I heard we got a notice a couple weeks ago, I need to change your password. In 2 weeks, you could be looted. You could have so many bad things happen, you can't begin to. Now, what you have to do, it really is case specific. Our firm, which has helped a lot of people who've had to breach, but we never had any of our people get breached and lose money. But the people who've shown up on our doorstep, and we've been to the passport office, the FBI, the FTC, we've even been to the Apple store and the telecom company. Again, it depends on what happens, but you got to do it immediately. The other thing to emphasize is all this stuff that I'm talking about here is not a one-time thing. You get new accounts, you lose devices, you get new devices. And companies also don't like it when you turn on the privacy settings. And so if you do turn on the privacy settings, you have to assume you're going to have to go back in and update them every now and then. And the reason being is they will change them. And so you have to think of this as a constant ongoing process where you're checking and updating stuff. And then about once a year, you need to go back and make sure everything's set up properly and do, complete reset up. The way I always end this thing when people they start with a question, which is, okay, you've told me I'm going to get it breached anyway. Now explain to me again, why am I doing all this stuff that takes so long? And the best way to think about this is two people are walking in the woods. They stumble onto a bear. The bear rears up and gets ready to go charge it after him. And one guy sits down and puts on track shoes. And the guy looks at him and goes, are you out of your mind? Even with track shoes, you can't outrun the bear. The guy says, dude, I don't have to outrun the bear. All I have to do is outrun you. That's what cybersecurity is about. It's how do you make yourself so you quickly become unattractive and the bear goes after somebody else. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Mark. I think that was a lot of information in a very short amount of time. One of the things I was thinking about that people would probably ask is, I'd say the most common one I've seen in the last year is all these hospitals got breached and all the records got breached. So they have all this information. You get a letter in the mail. We were breached. Please sign up for the service free for 2 years. Can you explain the difference between that and doing this full service cyber? Well, I
Sure.
learned something too. It's cyber privacy and cybersecurity are two different things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can explain the difference between what they do and what we do, if that's helpful.
Yeah.
What our company does is everything we've talked about, we will do it for you for $35 a month. It's all inclusive. We will set up your password manager. Everything's done remotely. Our software blocks us from ever having access to any passwords, being able to see them or copy them. We provide you the software. We do everything, get you completely set up. It takes about 1 3 hour appointment. It's done using Zoom, and then maybe a follow-up appointment to get some of your smart home technology set up. And then you get 24/7 support. We'll collect some information from you that we'll track on the dark web, but we collect it in a way so that even if we got breached, it wasn't usable. Give me your credit card number, but don't give me your 3 digit number, your expiration date. Where possible, we'll register your homes for notifications on title fraud. Once a year, we'll go in and pull down your credit reports with you and review them. And if there's ever a problem, we have teams of people that are very good at fixing this stuff. Our biggest complaint to clients is you're not calling us enough. We tell them always call us when in doubt. And then everything we're doing on an ongoing basis, we're updating. And once a year, we'll come back in and reset everything up to make sure everything is working as it should. That's our service. If you're interested at all in our service, we have set up a landing page on our website tied to Carol's company where you would come in and they'd have a form there. You'd have to give us your contact info and your advisor's contact info. And then what you would get is a calendar text message with a calendar link, and one of our guys is happy to talk to you about this. Identity protection services, in contrast, what they're doing is they are sort of doing the second half of what we do. They are somewhat analogous, as I said, to a pregnancy test instead of birth control. They just let you know you've been breached. Additionally, everything to get any value out of those takes a lot of work on your part. And to do everything we do on your own for a typical person would take about 150 hours. Also, they ignore cyber privacy. In fact, most of these companies are in the business of collecting and selling your info. And if you're not protecting your cyber privacy, there's a very high risk that burglars can use it, child predators can use it, and quite candidly, cyber criminals too, by taking your information and cloning your voice and image. Lastly, the way most of these identity protection services are sold is they have an insurance policy and they claim, oh my goodness, don't worry, you've got a couple $1 million of insurance. Well, I'd strongly encourage anybody who's using one of these to take a look at them. Most of the policies that we have seen have a provision which says if you have had simple negligence, which is a lowest legal standard, we have no liability. What that means is if you made a mistake anywhere along the way, you're not getting your money back. Additionally, they're umbrella policies. So unlike if your house got hit with a tornado and they would write, the insurance company would write you a check less the deductible, here, in this case, you first have to sue everybody you potentially could who might be partially liable. And you have to spend a lot of money and a lot of time. And only when you're done with that, you can take the insurer to arbitration. And there's a real possibility if you lose the arbitration, you're going to have to pay their legal fees. Again, these things are very different than what people realize. What you want to do is prevent getting breached in the first place. And then everything else is sort of a secondary measure just in case something happens.
Well, and I think people who get the free services because they've been breached think that, oh, okay, I'm protected now. It's a misnomer. That's not really the case.
I have no idea. They're not
Right. So
not at all.
if you have identity theft, like you said, I think there's a lot of work that you have to do, let alone whether or not they're really going to help. And it's not preventative at all. It's more, we'll contact every card you gave us.
Yeah, I'll give you an example which scared me. If
Yeah.
someone's able to get enough information to steal your identity, what cyber criminals who become much more aggressive at this, they'll call, say, your bank. What they'll first do is hit your bank account and put the wrong password in 5 or 6 times and get locked out. Then they'll call the bank and they'll say, I screwed up. I put the wrong password in. I need to reset it. And what the bank will say is, okay, what was your birthday? What was your mother's maiden name? They have a bunch of questions. But if you can answer all those, guess what? They'll let them reset the password. And a lot of people have a lot of money stolen this way. So if you have identity theft, yes, you got to worry about your credit, but it's a much more complex problem because it creates all kinds of ancillary risks should something like this happen.
Yeah, I just think it's such important information, and it's gotten so advanced, like you said, that it's hard for people to keep up. Another question I have is, I would think people would think that this is overwhelming. And I know you said that you help people all set that up, but what if it's our grandparents who aren't very savvy on the internet? How does that work?
That's a great question. Our average age of our client is 70. We intentionally use off-the-shelf software like Keeper and Surfshark, partially because they're widely used and they're independently vetted, but really importantly, they're very easy to use. And the way we've done this is we have an appointment with a client. It takes us about 3 hours, about 45 minutes of their time. And most of the time is teaching them how to use everything. And then we schedule a 30-minute follow-up appointment afterwards because we want to make sure that everything's fine. And they have a 24-hour number they can call. We're always available. We average about 1 to 1.5 calls a year per client. But we tell the clients the only time you'll ever upset us is if you don't call us. But once this is set up, think about this. Trying to remember passwords and trying to get into different accounts, that's hard. What we're going to do is all your accounts will be in this password manager. You'll be the only one who has the password to the password manager, but you have a copy in your safe just in case you ever need to get it. But you put the password in, and on your device, for example, on your phone, you can set it up. We will set it up so it uses facial recognition technology. So it'll just open up for you. So you don't even have to put the password in. And all you have to do is push on the account you want. It goes right to the account. It auto populates all the fields most of the 80% of the time. And the rest of the time, you just push a button to copy the password and paste it. What we have found is that once somebody gets set up like this, they never want to switch because it's just so much easier to operate online and so much safer.
Because I'm a financial advisor, and one of the things I see come up is when someone passes away and there's estate issues and somebody wants to get into the account, the executor, whatever. And granted, once they get the paperwork, they can often get in, but that can take a lot of time before they can actually have access. And so a lot of my clients want to set it up so that their kids could go ahead and access it whenever. So if they have this password protector, can they share? Do they just share that password with the child?
Yeah, they share the password to the password manager along with the email account associated with it, and then they can just go in and do it.
Okay. Yeah. Just because they always like having a plan that if something happens,
Oh,
or
absolutely.
even husband and wife, obviously. If my husband
Absolutely.
ends up in the hospital, I need to get the records for the whatever, and I
Right.
don't kick into the system.
That's right. And our services are not per person, it's per family. Most families we do for $35 a month. It covers up to 3 devices. If they have more than three, for an extra $5 a month, we'll throw in three more. And it takes care of everything. Now they pay us the first year's fee up front, and then it's quarterly in advance thereafter. And they pay for it with a credit card. So it's painless. It's cheaper than most of these identity services, I might add. And the objective here, though, is to get you set up and get you protected. And if you do this, it simplifies your life. It doesn't make it more complicated.
Yeah, definitely. So besides knowing that people would need to sign up for your services, if you could give our listeners one piece of wisdom for the years you've worked in the cyber security, cyber privacy business, what would that be?
The one piece of wisdom is there's no one thing. I always get this question, tell me the one thing you would do. And you have to remember that if you don't do all these things that we talked about, you're leaving openings for people to get in. Think about if you built a castle and you forget to shut one of the doors, or there's a crack in the wall somewhere. They will find their way in. So you have to do each of these steps. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is if you do all these steps, the likelihood of having a bad event falls precipitously. A good friend of mine from West Point used to be the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Cyber and helped me start the company and set it up. And he told me once that if everybody did this, you would see cybercrime at the personal level, not at the corporate level, would fall like 97, 98%, because it's just very hard for bad guys to get to you if you do this. But nobody does this. And so right now, it's just the happy days if you happen to be a cyber criminal.
Yeah. Is there anything else we didn't talk about that you think our listeners should know?
Well, look, I would encourage everybody to not kick the can down the road. An enormous number of clients that we have gotten have shown up on our doorstep after something bad has happened. And you aren't getting your money back. We can prevent that from happening again. But once it's done, and typically a company, when it gets breached, as an example, the bad guys have gotten in 10 days before anyone figures it out. So usually by the time you figure out something bad's happened, it's too late. If you really want to protect, one, yourself, two, your wealth, and more importantly, your family, you should do this stuff now, not until after something bad has happened.
Yeah. Such great information. And just can you just briefly say again how people can sign up and not just while as you pull up that slide, I was just going to say, so I don't make any money off you guys signing up my clients or whoever decides to
Not at
go to
all.
me to sign up. I don't get a payback or anything like that. This is just something I feel is really important for my clients to have. So I'm offering a way to do that.
Yeah, and if you again you come here, a form will pop up. You give Carol's info, you give your info, and then what you'll get is a text message that's automatically generated to you. You pick a 10 or 15-minute slot. One of my partners will get on the phone and be happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for your wise words and great advice.
Thank
For
you
our,
very much for having me.
you're welcome. And for all of our listeners, This has been the She Wins Women, Wealth, Wisdom, and Legacy podcast with Carol Eddy. And our guest today has been Mark Hurley. Thanks again, Mark, for joining us today. As a reminder, the content shared on this podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only. It does not constitute personalized financial advice. For guidance tailored to your specific situation, please schedule an appointment with me or consult a qualified financial advisor. This is an independent podcast, not affiliated with Money Concepts Capital Corp. Thanks.